Convener, that's resumed.
Okay, thank you. And we resume after lunch to item 11 on the agenda, which is the motion 3 by Councillors McCartan and Andy Doig. Councillor McCartan.
Thank you, Provost. Unpaid carers, usually of family loved ones, are the most kind and supportive of people, happy to do what they see as their duty and their care of their charges, and do not look for any huge effort on behalf of the council to give them any more support, if any, that they already have. But just look at the second paragraph of the motion that we put forward, and it shows the depth of despair that some of them have reached, particularly during this COVID period, in terms of tiredness and stress at not being able, in many cases, even to get out of the house, the 24/7 support they need to give because some of their casual supporters of their loved ones is not available to them. They just need a break. Whether that break is just to go into another room or to go out a walk or whatever limited activity they can do just now, they just need someone to take over for a wee while. And that's all that's being asked here. We have an excellent carer centre who would be able to ensure that the council was reaching those people in need of help. And we have suggested that this type of service should be provided at least until the COVID crisis is over, with funding coming from the council, from funds being supplied by Westminster to meet this need. It's not a big ask for us, but it would be a huge support to these otherwise unsung heroes and heroines of our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Eileen. Andy? Councillor Doig?
You Provost, thanks. Eileen makes a very succinct point that unpaid carers save the public purse millions every year, and at no great expense to their own time, their own earning capacity. It can be very stressful for them as well in terms of their family relationships, because the whole family dynamic can change when someone who's maybe been a partner, a husband or a wife, you suddenly become their carer, and the whole dynamic of that changes, and it can even place a lot of guilt on the person who's the carer, because the stress of the continual care can be just too much for them, and then they feel tremendous guilt because they realise that the significant other in their life is totally dependent on them. So we really have to do, I think, as a society, we have to do what we can to make their lives more tolerable, fairer and better. And I'm pleased to support the motion, Provost. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Doig. Councillor Nicholson?
Thanks, Provost. I sent a slight amendment to Dave Lowe a few minutes ago.
Can you confirm if Dave has that?
Yeah, yes, Provost. I've just, with Councillor Nicholson formally moving it, I've now posted it.
Okay, thank you, Dave.
We're not disputing the facts about support for unpaid carers, and again, the small amendment, hopefully Eileen will accept, will be to replace the first paragraph, simply because again we're in the area of not specifying the support that's provided to carers from IJB and HSCP and different other agencies as well. But we are committing to, in the amendment, as the council recognises the impact that COVID has had on the lives of unpaid carers during the pandemic, and recognises that the lived experience of every carer is unique to them and their needs for support required to be individually assessed. Council agrees that any additional COVID-specific resources available for carers during the pandemic will be fully deployed in supporting carers and in line with the relevant legislation. It's hopefully it's an attempt to define the support that we provide as a council, and hopefully that will help give assurances that any resources, any available that come through the pandemic from either the Scottish Government, we're quite happy to contact the Scottish Government as well about the Barnett formula side of it, but any resources that come through as a council, we'll commit that to where we can with regards to supporting carers in any way we can at this time. So hopefully that will be accepted, Provost.
Councillor, who's your seconder?
Councillor Patterson here. I'll formally second Councillor Nicholson.
Okay, I have an intimation earlier on before the meeting that Councillor Bibby wishes to speak in this item. Councillor Bibby.
Thank you, Provost. Councillor Doig and Councillor McCartan, along with myself, will be aware that there have been various motions throughout the last number of years in regard to carers and unpaid carers, and the stresses and strains that they experience from having to care for loved ones has only been exacerbated. It's not been created by COVID, it's been exacerbated by COVID. And it's almost kind of law of diminishing returns apply. That the more we talk about this, the greater demand and the less that seems to be available in some regard. And I can think of a conversation that I had with a constituent whereby people can become sceptical at some of the motions that actually go through the council without necessarily having a positive outcome. And by the way, I would just refer us to the motion that we had back in December with regard to respite care at Corsford School, which is obviously a different element to the same issue because it's about carers and respite. And the conclusion of that was effectively that the council should in actual fact take every action and all steps to ensure that the service was protected through the discussions with Capability Scotland and if necessary bring the service in-house. Now I mention that because when we actually looked at the minutes earlier on in the meeting, there was no reference made to that, and it's about actually ensuring that whatever motions are put forward by this council, they do have an outcome, because without an outcome and a positive outcome, they're of little value. So whilst I support the motion in its entirety and actually do think that the kind of care that Councillor McCartan has talked about will help strains and the stresses as a result of COVID. I would hope by the time that the council meeting actually occurs that we have some progress on this. So hopefully those comments are helpful. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Bibby. We don't have any other speakers as far as I can see. So, Eileen, are you going to accept Councillor Nicholson's amendment?
Yes. I mean, he's focusing on what we can achieve rather than what we might want to achieve. And I think at this stage, what I'm anxious to do is to make sure that carers get whatever is going and not be involved in some long protracted discussion on something which I think is right, what we may think is right, but which is not at present achievable. So on that basis, I'm prepared to accept the amendment.
Okay, Councillor Devine had his hand up. I'm sorry, Councillor, I didn't see you. Do you want to speak?
Well,
you're on mute, Councillor Devine.
If it helps out, Provost, you'll be supporting Councillor McCartan and Councillor Doig's motion. Okay
then. Okay, so that is the motion as amended, Eileen. Everyone's agreed to it. We can move on, okay?
Yeah.
Agreed.
Thank you. And motion 4 is Councillors Kenny, McLaren and Burns. Councillor McLaren.
Thank you, Provost. This is a fairly straightforward motion to congratulate all those involved in the vaccination programme, to encourage everyone to come forward for the vaccination and to condemn the misinformation regarding the actual vaccine programme. I believe the latest figures for Scotland is that over 1.6 million people have had their first vaccination, and it's now approaching 100,000 have had their second vaccination. I was fortunate to have my first vaccination a couple of weeks ago at the Anchor Mill Medical Centre in Paisley, and congratulating everyone involved in the vaccination programme. I would like to thank everyone at Anchor Mill for a very professional and swift service. From the receptionist to the GPs, everything went smoothly. It was very professionally set up and extremely well organised. And from what I'm hearing, all other vaccination centres have been running smoothly. The list of those to thank is long, but as the motion states, it includes staff at GP practices, council, RLL, health board staff, as well as various volunteers. It is important, unless you have serious medical reasons, that everyone takes the vaccine when offered. It's the best way to protect your friends and loved ones. We've seen recently the failure of lockdowns, especially in international travel, with an outbreak of the so-called Brazilian variant. Vaccination is the only real option to protect ourselves. There is, however, excuse me, a concern about a recent outbreak of graffiti in Paisley attacking the vaccination programme and calling the COVID pandemic a scamdemic. This is despicable. I mean, it's good that the council's moved swiftly to remove such graffiti, but we all have to be wary of such misinformation. Most, if not all, graffiti is unwelcome, and the costs are borne by council or property owners. However, this goes further, and it's an insult to everyone who's had to stay at home to protect themselves and their loved ones. It's an insult to those who have suffered badly with COVID or who have lost a loved one to this pandemic. And worst of all, it was painted on one of the main routes to the RAH and will be seen by RAH staff who are working long and stressful shifts to tackle this pandemic, with some of them comforting dying COVID patients as loved ones aren't allowed in to see them. Around 125,000 people have died across the UK from the COVID pandemic. And the person who sprayed this insult is insulting the memory of everyone who has died or is currently suffering long-term effects of COVID. I would hope that everyone can support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McLaren. Councillor Burns, do you wish to speak just now?
Thanks, Provost. Just I'll firmly second the motion and agree with all the comments Councillor McLaren said. Thank you.
Okay, do we have any amendments to the motion or any other comments? I think Councillor Devine, you had your hand up, but we're not sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, Councillor Devine.
Again, Provost, just to say that we'll be supporting this very worthwhile motion from Kenny and Stephen.
Okay, thank you. And there are no other comments, so the motion is agreed.
Provost.
Sorry, Eileen.
Yes, I really have, I've hardly anything to say other than to say I pass that notice virtually every day that Councillor McLaren mentioned, and it's absolutely appalling. It's huge. I just hope that the council will get it cleared if it hasn't already been cleared. Certainly wasn't a couple of days ago, but it really needs to get cleared very, very quickly. And I would ask that somebody gets out and gets it cleared, because it is a disgrace, as has been said.
Yeah, I agree. Councillor Jacqueline Cameron.
Yeah, just to agree with Councillor McLaren's comments, it's hugely demoralising for the staff who are having to, work with people every day, and as Kenny said, seeing people die in front of them. And the Health and Social Care Partnership, their nursing team were out over Christmas and New Year, giving up their holidays to make sure everyone in the care homes was vaccinated, residents and staff. And that, and also Renfrewshire Leisure staff, council staff, everyone, NHS, have all been involved in that. And for them to see that sort of graffiti, as I say, is hugely demoralising. So just a thanks to everybody involved in the vaccination programme.
Yeah. Councillor McCartan, did you want to come back in? No? No, I'm sorry, I've got a little delay, so I'm not sure whether your hand's down now. Councillor Burns?
Just Provost and Councillor McCartan's comments. The graffiti is gone. It has been for probably well over a week. I will say the Environmental Service Department have been absolutely brilliant. They've responded very, very quickly to get the graffiti off, so well done to Gordon McNeil and his team. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Gordon. And there are no other members wishing to speak, so we'll just move on, and your motion is agreed. Councillor McLaren, motion 4. Move on to motion 5. It's item 13 on the agenda, and it's by Councillors Audrey Doig and Jacqueline Cameron. Councillor Doig.
Thank you, Provost. I'm not going to say a lot on this motion. It's quite an extensive motion and basically puts all its aims and objectives fairly clear in the motion itself. The people who suffer from invisible diseases are wide and varied, but I'm sure that most people that are in this meeting today have had a time where they've been looking very urgently for a toilet when they've been out walking or out there, and basically having signage and having toilets opened is very important to a lot of people in the population, but especially for these people that suffer from the diseases. So I'm quite basically asking everybody to support this motion and put forward the ideas of making sure that the logos are basically put in all the toilets that we have. We do have quite a lot of toilets that will meet this criteria already in council buildings, a lot in Renfrewshire Leisure and different town halls, etc. But it's just to make a clarification that we basically make sure the logos and the directions to the nearest toilet are very clear, and I hope you can all support this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Doig. Councillor Cameron?
I've nothing more to add, Provost, thanks.
Okay, Councillor McCartan.
Thank you, Provost. I just would fully support the motion, but I want to focus on the paragraph on the issue of changing places. And I would remind colleagues that about 2 to 3 years ago, you passed a motion agreeing to have 10 changing places toilets in and around Renfrewshire within approximately 5 years. Last time I counted, I believe there was 3, but I think some of them are being incorporated into some of the newer buildings, but I am not certain how many more have been created up to now. I didn't want to amend the motion, which is very good in itself, but it would be good to know how far the council has got in complying with that previous motion, which we agreed previously and unanimously. Thank you.
Yeah, Eileen, I agree. I think we can get that information easily to all members. Okay, Councillor Mackay.
Yes, hello, Provost. I just wanted to ask something on the back of this motion, and that was if the reopening of public toilets could be speeded up. For example, the Paisley Centre, I know that's a privately owned shopping centre, but Paisley Centre able-bodied toilets are shut, and it's clearly labelled on the disabled toilet that if you're not disabled, or it says disabled people only, so those who are actually able-bodied are prevented from using it. And so just on the back of this, I would like confidence from the council that they will be doing everything to open up toilets for all people of all abilities, not just disabled people. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Eddie Devine.
Yeah. Again, Provost, to seek clarity, we'll support this as well, so that we're all being friends again.
Thank you. I'm sure they'll be so relieved to hear that.
Oh, good pun there, Chair.
Okay. Councillor Sharkey, and then Councillor Burns. Councillor Sharkey.
I'm absolutely welcome the motion in the terms that it's in. But I mean, I think it's an important point to make that one of the reasons that local government came about, if you look at its history, was indeed to provide the health and sanitation and public toilets that are so useful for public health. And at this time during COVID, when we're picking out certain groups of key workers, it's important to remember that many of the key workers that we've been congratulating, particularly the likes of postmen and the people who make these deliveries, right, that they are also in need of, as was described, that situation where you may be caught short, right, and a greater provision of toilets is absolutely essential. And I think Councillor Mackay inadvertently made a good point. The trouble with private toilets is that they're not there for the benefit, right, of the community. They are there normally because we've insisted on them.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Burns.
Sorry, I didn't want in, Provost.
Oh, sorry, Councillor Burns, I thought you did. Okay, so if we have nobody else who wishes to speak, we can move on then. And it seems that we're going to agree this motion by Councillor Odgedoig and Jacqueline Cameron. Agreed. And we move on to motion 6. Excuse me, I get my specs.
Yes. Provost, that's me, and I would like to withdraw this motion on the understanding that the Chaps Board is going to be discussing the very same subject next week.
Okay, Eileen, thank you. I take it Councillor Andy Doig's okay with that as well. Yeah.
So long as there is we can get an assurance, Provost, that there is there will be a full and comprehensive discussion of the LDP at the Chaps Board next week, because there are serious deficiencies with it. Thank you.
Yeah, that's the right place, I think, to talk about that. Motion 7 then. Motion 6 has been withdrawn, just for clarity. Motion 7 is by Councillors James McLaren and Graham. Councillor Graham. Councillor McLaren.
Thank you, Provost. I'm happy to move the motion as it is. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor McLaren. Councillor Graham, you're officially seconding.
Sorry, yes, Provost, I second and reserve the right to speak. Thanks.
Okay, do we have any amendments to this motion? I think Councillor Devine is showing with his hand up.
No, not me.
Not you?
No.
Right,
Councillor Shaw, Provost.
Is it Councillor Shaw? Right, I'm sorry. I think I've actually lifted the wrong glasses. Councillor Shaw.
Thanks, Provost. This is something we're restricted to doing in some of the smaller value contracts where we can affect, sort of bringing more local suppliers into a tender process. So it's something I fully support, and something that we should look at moving forward. But maybe just a wee pointer to Councillor Sheridan, that rather than sticking in random amendments which may or may not be competent, this is the way to do it.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Nicholson.
No, sorry, Provost. Councillor Shaw's covered some of the points I was going to make. Thanks.
Okay, finally, Councillor Sharkey. I'm not sure whether you did want in or not, but I have a feeling I've seen your name. No? Yes?
Sorry, Provost, if you did, it was for the next one, motion.
Okay, thank you. Okay, there don't appear to be any other members who wish to contribute on this motion, so there are no amendments. So can we agree motion 7 then?
Agreed.
Yeah? Okay, item 16. It's motion 8 by Councillors James McLaren and McIntyre, which I think is kind of superseded by Kate Forbes' announcement in Parliament. But Councillor McLaren, if you want to speak to that.
Provost, thank you, Provost. Yes, we welcome the Scottish Government's move to extend business rates relief for all retail, hospitality, leisure and aviation related businesses as for the forthcoming financial year, along with I think that was the Conservative recommendation. So great. Thank you very much for that.
Does that mean it's withdrawn, Provost? Can I hear you? Can I hear you?
Sorry, Councillor Devine, I did point out to the member that this was superseded by Kate Forbes' announcement, and I did expect him to withdraw the motion, to be perfectly honest, but he hasn't. But I think there are actually amendments. Am I right?
That's correct. That's the amendment you were referring to a moment ago.
Yeah.
Okay. If you have an amendment, could you make yourself be known, please?
Hi, Provost. It's Councillor Andy Doig here. I've got an amendment which I've posted to David Law, and he's put it on. He's emailed it out, I think. It's to add "and social enterprises" after businesses in line 3 and before 4 in the same line. So it's a very simple textual amendment to add and social enterprises after businesses in line 3 and before 4 in the same line. Do you want me to just speak to that? Councillor McCartan is seconding it. Do you want me to speak to that amendment, Provost?
You go right ahead.
Right, okay. I think it's important to highlight, Provost, the contribution that social enterprises are increasingly making in terms of their contribution to the economy, especially in areas that have traditionally had high unemployment or poverty or disadvantage. If you look across the whole of Europe, social enterprises number some 2 million. They actually employ over 11 million people across the whole of Europe. So this is a trend which will not diminish, but actually increase. And I think if we look at the post-COVID retail environment, we're all worried about this. I mean, those of us who represent town centres are especially worried about the future of the town centre, because you have a development now that that some commentators have said we're suffering from too much bland town, which is you can go to towns which up and down the UK, which were once very distinctive, but now you can see the same major retailers in the same towns and they look pretty much the same. And the victim of much of that has been local small businesses who find that they can't compete. And local businesses do bring a lot to the local economy. They provide vital job opportunities. So I think what we'll see in the future is you'll see a more blended town centre where you still have local businesses that we need to support and need to help in every way we can. And we need to also support social enterprises, and you'll have a kind of blended town centre. In some parts of Scotland, there was an item on the network news, I think it was a few weeks ago, and down in Dumfries and Galloway, where a local community council had taken major efforts to regenerate their town centre. There were too many local businesses that had shut down. The town centre prospect was looking fairly bleak, but one of the ways that they managed to turn it round was through social enterprises. So I do think if we're going to give small businesses a break, which I completely support, I think we should also give social enterprises that same consideration, Provost. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Sheridan. I believe you have an amendment. Sharkey, sorry, Councillor Sharkey.
Yes, Provost. It's, when you said earlier on that you'd seen my name, I assumed that you'd seen it. The clerk has the amendment, and as soon as I formally move it, he's sending it out to you. So I'm formally moving my amendment.
Thank you. So that amendment has been circulated. Do you want to speak to it just now?
Yeah, you know, happy to.
Who's your seconder?
Councillor Devine.
Okay.
Right. Sorry. The motion that I've or the amendment to the motion I put forward was when I first read you know, motion 8. You know, there's a lot in it to agree with. I absolutely, you know, think that certainly those you know, businesses that can get and benefit from rates relief during this time should absolutely get it. But I got one of those a curious taste of it, I think, in the same way as we've experienced earlier on in the day, because again, this is one of the obsessions of the Conservative Party, is the rates. They've often been you know, described as the ratepayers party, right? Meaning that they're against people paying rates. But the general conception is that anything that's a burden on business, and more particularly their businesses, right, should be opposed, without recognising the vitally important part that civic and local government you know, takes in making an area proper. We've just discussed the issue of toilets. Without stealing anybody's thunders, we're going on you know, in motion 11 to talk about you know, standards in housing. We've already talked about adult social care and how it needed local democratic control. One of our other debates was about industrial democracy, right, for us. And here's the common theme always here, is that private, right, especially you know, private development, does not necessarily bring a community good, right, to it. So that's why I've put my motion forward in the terms that it is, to recognise that, in fact, government, both at Scottish level, Westminster level, and at our level, is in fact not just a useful and necessary thing, but is actually a good thing and shouldn't be snidely remarked at. Now, obviously I'm reading in to that, and I'm happy for the Conservatives to come back and defend their motion. But I've had long experience, right, of this tangential argument against government, and I think it behoves us that to actually serve in local government to stand up for it and just say that some things have to be done publicly and have to be done well publicly and have to be paid for publicly. So let's not always be snide about rates.
Thank you, Councillor Sharkey. Councillor Devine, do you want to speak?
I'll formally second it, Provost. I'm looking for you on the screen. I can't see it. I'll formally second it. Cheers.
Okay, no worries. Okay, I think Councillor Nicholson.
Thanks, Provost. I'm a bit unclear about what we're doing at this point. We appear to be discussing amendments to a motion that's no longer competent. It's been made redundant, if I have to understand the conversation at the start. And I'm also unclear about Councillor Sharkey's amendment, which appears to be a completely separate motion. His amendment doesn't appear to say he's replacing any part of the motion on the paper. And has it been tagged on? Is it a complete replacement? So I think there's I need some clarity, I think, and I think some elected members need some clarity about exactly what we're doing here, because my understanding was that this motion as it stood on the paper was redundant, simply because, and the mover agreed with that because of the decision of the Finance Minister with regards to extending the funding for retail, for businesses. Thanks, Provost.
I think I maybe seek some clarification from Ken. I mean, I can't withdraw the motion. It isn't my motion to withdraw, but if the motion is incompetent,
Could I come in here, please, Provost? If that would help. Councillor McLaren.
James McLaren, yes. Hello, James.
Hello. Provost, I would like to accept the amendment from Councillor Sharkey and Councillor Doig as an addition to my motion. Thank you.
Okay. I first have to clarify whether your motion is still competent or not, and that's what I wish to ask of Ken, if Ken is available for some advice. Because you can't amend an incompetent motion, because we can't go any further than that if the motion is incompetent. So if Ken could maybe clarify.
My view on it, Provost, is that the motion hasn't been withdrawn, so the motion is still live for the council to consider. Looking at the way it's worded, I mean, it might be asking, it's asking the council to write a letter. It might be asking the council to write a letter about something that's now pointless, but I don't think that affects the competency as such of the motion. Okay. I know that seems to produce a bit of a nonsensical outcome, but I think looking at it in pure governance terms, that's the outcome I've got to get to. That it's a motion that's still there, it's not been withdrawn, and it's asking the council to do something that it can technically do. So it meets that test of competence.
Okay.
Right. In order to help you and move things forward, I'm more than willing to accept the proposal from Councillor McLaren.
I don't really need you to help me. The proposal will be taken. If Councillor McLaren is accepting your amendment to this, then he's accepting an amendment to a motion that seems to be pointless. However, it is not incompetent. So that's where we are.
Provost, sorry. Provost, it's Councillor
Hello.
Andy Doig here.
Councillor Doig, yes.
A question, please. If Kate Forbes has taken a decision, this might seem a bit pedantic, but it's relevant to what you and the council leader have said, that if Kate Forbes taken a decision also in relation to social enterprises, because that's relevant, because our amendment wants to include that. If she hasn't, then the motion's still valid, surely.
Yeah, but and your amendment is only your amendment is only valid if the motion is valid in the first place, and that is what I had to determine.
Why is it not valid? It's just, I don't know what Kate Forbes has necessarily said. Can you tell the
It is valid. I'm telling you. I've just said it. It's not the motion. It's not incompetent. So we're ploughing on as where.
Okay.
Councillor Nicholson, do you want to come back in at this point for a bit more clarification?
Yeah, Provost. I think if this is the way we're going with this, it's difficult to accept a motion that's redundant in all its shape and forms with regards to sending a letter to the Scottish Government asking to do something they already did. But if that's the case, then I would like to seek that I would move the motion as stated on the paper, Provost.
Okay.
I'm happy to second that, Provost.
Okay.
Provost.
Yes, Eileen.
That was a real sigh. As my hand's been up for ages.
I'm trying to move us on with this item.
I appreciate that. What I couldn't understand is that Councillor James McLaren has said he is prepared to accept the Labour amendment.
Yes.
The Labour amendment completely negates his motion because it says at the beginning, replace all with. So does Councillor James McLaren mean he wants to get rid of his own motion and take on board the Labour motion? Is that what he really means?
Well, if you had just given me a chance to do my job, I would have done
beg your pardon.
Councillor James McLaren.
Provost, thank you. I did say that I would be happy to accept it as an addition, and that is the meaning.
And I'm agreeable to that.
Provost.
Okay.
Provost,
Councillor Nicholson, can you please come in now?
Yes, can I just say, I mean, Councillor McCartney's absolutely right. It actually wipes out their amendment to Councillor McLaren's motion on the paper, because Councillor Doig's amendment is very directly connected to what's written on the papers. And if you wipe out that motion, you wipe out their amendment, because there's nothing for their amendment to latch onto. Because Councillor Sharkey's motion, and that's in effect what it is, completely wipes that right off the agenda. So we're in a bit of an impasse here with regards to how we move forward with this one, because we can't. That's the reason why I was raising the point about Councillor Sharkey's amendment. It's a completely new motion to this. Now, if we're going to go down the road that we put motions on the agenda, then somebody can just come up with an amendment which completely puts a new motion on the agenda. We haven't had the 2 weeks the notice with it, etc., etc. And it's always been the case that an amendment to a motion has to be directly relevant to the subject matter on the paper. Now, Councillor Sharkey's amendment doesn't do that. And it completely wipes out Councillor Doig's amendment as well. And I think that's where we are with this one. And that's why, unusually, I'm saying to yourself that if that goes the way we think it's going to go, we'll be forced just to try and move what's on the paper, because that's the legitimate motion that was put on the papers, put out to notice to the elected members.
Yeah.
Not somebody coming up on the day and putting new motions on the agenda. You know, that can't, to my mind, be a proper way of working with regards to that one. As I say, and Councillor Doig, I think, has to appreciate the fact that his amendment is out the window as well, because Councillor Sharkey's amendment has wiped that out. Thanks, Provost.
Yeah, I appreciate that this might sound convoluted and a little bit mixed up for a lot of councillors. Ken, do you have any other advice to offer at this point?
Advice, I'm not sure if you call it that. I mean, I share Councillor Nicholson's frustration, because I'm trying to work out when he was speaking exactly what we're presented with. Now, on one hand, we seem to have what I can gather was what should have been Councillor McLaren's original motion, but so we've now got an addition to that. Although Councillor Sharkey's original amendment was meant to replace it, I take it from what Councillor Sharkey is saying that he now just wants that as an addition to the original motion. Is that correct?
I'm just acceding to Councillor McLaren's request, absolutely. And I mean, so all we're changing is my replace all this with. And the only reason I put that up is because for some reason Councillor Nicholson seems to have missed it in his first reading of my amendment. So as I said to the Provost, I'm more than happy to just have this as an addendum to the original one, and everybody seems to be in agreement here. I don't see why this is the difficulty.
Right, so what we've got then is we've got the original motion. On one hand, we've got the original motion by Councillor McLaren, including the amendment that was made by Councillor Doig. And on top of that, it's also this wording changes then to that original motion. Then in addition to that, we've got Councillor Sharkey's amendment. So that's one proposition. And then on the other proposition that we've got, the council's been asked to decide on, is the original motion that as on the paper. So I think if we're going to, well, my advice to you, Provost, is that I think we are faced with two propositions that need to go to the vote.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So the first proposition I think will take as Councillor McLaren's original motion as amended, and will take as the second proposition or the amendment, for the want of a different word, as Councillor Nicholson's motion, which is just the original wording.
Okay. And do we have any other amendments at this point?
I'm sorry, Councillor Cameron, could I have one wee clarification?
Sure.
If Councillor Nicholson's motion or amendment is just the original wording, does that include or exclude our amendment?
From Councillor Nicholson might be able to answer that better than me, but
Councillor Doig.
Yes, I'm happy to accept Councillor Doig's original amendment to the motion on the paper. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks for that, Councillor Nicholson. So that means, in effect, if I can kind of redefine the two options that are now available to the councillors. So starting on the basis that it was originally Councillor James McCarran that brought forward the motion. So the motion, the first proposition is Councillor McLaren's original motion that includes Councillor Doig's amendment and Councillor Sharkey's amendment as an addition to that. And the other option is the original motion plus only Councillor Doig's amendment without Councillor Sharkey's amendment to it. So I'm almost dreading asking this, but do members understand those two different propositions that you're going to be asked to vote on?
Yes. Yes, understand.
Okay. I'll try and restate that then for the purpose. Or do you want me to go to the vote now, or somebody else might want to come in, Provost?
Okay, I'll give a final opportunity. If anyone wants to come in for clarification or with any other amendments, can you please say so now?
Right, I think you should restate, please, Provost. Yes, I'm
going to ask Andy. I'm going to ask Ken to do that.
Right.
Sorry, some of us have had our hands up for quite a while. Do we just butt in now?
Eddie, you want to come in just now?
Yeah, I don't understand what's difficult about it. Jim Sharkey made it quite clear. It includes the James's motion, includes Andy and Eileen's addition, and it also includes our addition. I don't understand why we've got three different additions, or else are we just making this up as we go along? As we did this morning.
Andy's addition, because it removes it all.
Exactly. I'm going to get Ken to
listen, Councillor Sharkey said he would take. Councillor Sharkey can explain it himself. He's a proposer.
Well, thank you for that. Well, Councillor Mackay.
Yes, Provost. I have a very simplistic view of life, and it seems quite straightforward to me. Councillor McLaren and McIntyre put forward a motion that Councillor Doig has added an amendment to, which they have accepted, and Councillor Sharkey has put in an amendment which is amended slightly, in that he's happy to put his contribution on the end of the original motion as amended by Councillor Doig.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see any amendment by Councillor Nicholson having been emailed out, so I'm really not sure what the difficulty is. The motion has been put forward, the amendment by Councillor Doig has been agreed, accepted, and the addition by Councillor Sharkey has been accepted. So what's the difficulty?
Ken, do you want to clarify for everyone?
No, it seems to be that everyone is clear about the two options that are on the table. Councillor Mackay just explained it. So I mean, obviously, I just needed to ask the question that everybody was, just to make sure everybody was clear, because we've been through a number of iterations. So if members are clear what they're voting on, then obviously we can go to the vote. Again, obviously, it's up to you if you want other members to make a contribution.
But there's no need for a vote because the amendments have been accepted.
No.
No.
And what's the alternative? What's the alternative motion then? Because the original motion has the two amendments accepted.
Would you like 5 minutes to go away? Would you like 5 minutes to go away and discuss this with your group?
No.
No.
Let's move to the vote.
Let's go to the vote.
What's the contrary motion to the original motion that's been amended?
Provost.
Let's move on, Alistair. Let's move on. You're clearly not understanding what's happening here. I've tried to get Ken. Ken has tried to explain. We will just go to the vote. No one else wants to speak, so let's just do it.
Thank you, Provost. It's a roll call vote. The motion is between the first proposition, which we'll call the motion for the purpose of the vote, and that's the original. That's the original motion put forward by Councillor McLaren, as amended by Councillor Doig's amendment and the amendment put forward by Councillor Sharkey. So that's the first option, which we'll call the motion. The amendment is put forward by Councillor Nicholson, seconded by Councillor Campbell, which is just the original terms of the motion, as amended by Councillor Doig. So the only difference between the two is the addition of Councillor Sharkey's amendment to it, if you want me to put it in those terms. So if you vote for the motion, you're voting for the entirety that includes Councillor Sharkey's addition. If you're voting for the amendment, it's only the first two parts of it, which is Councillor McLaren and Councillor Doig's contributions. So, Councillor Adam McGregor, motion or amendment?
Amendment.
Councillor Begg.
Motion.
Councillor Bibby.
Motion.
Councillor Binks.
Motion.
Councillor Brown.
Motion.
Councillor Burns.
Amendment.
Councillor Jacqueline Cameron.
Amendment.
Provost Cameron.
Amendment.
Councillor Campbell.
Amendment.
Councillor Davidson.
Motion.
Councillor Devine.
Motion.
Councillor Andy Doig.
Motion.
Councillor Audrey Doig.
Amendment.
Councillor Dawn.
Amendment.
Councillor Dowling.
Having lost the will to live. Motion.
Councillor Grady.
Motion.
Councillor Graham.
Motion.
Councillor Hart. Councillor Hart.
Motion.
Councillor Hood.
Motion.
Councillor Hughes.
Amendment.
Councillor Kennedy.
Motion.
Councillor Kerr.
Motion.
Councillor Mack. Councillor Mack. Is Councillor Mack still at the meeting? Do you know? Anyway, Councillor Mackay.
Motion.
Councillor James McLaren.
Motion.
Councillor Kenny McLaren.
Amendment.
Councillor Max McLaren.
Amendment.
Councillor McCartan.
Amendment.
Councillor McCulloch.
Motion.
Councillor McEwen.
Amendment.
Councillor McGurk.
Amendment.
Councillor McIntyre.
Motion.
Councillor McNaughton.
Amendment.
Councillor Montgomery.
Motion.
Councillor Mylett.
Amendment.
Councillor Nicholson.
Amendment.
Councillor Patterson.
Amendment.
Councillor Rodden.
Amendment.
Councillor Sharkey.
Motion.
Councillor Shaw.
Amendment.
Councillor Sheridan.
Motion.
Councillor Steele.
Amendment.
And Councillor Strang.
Motion.
Could I just check if Councillor Mack's at the meeting? Still want to vote?
Councillor Mack is still showing as being online, but he's muted.
Provost, do you want me to proceed to announce the decision? Councillor Mack doesn't seem to participate in the votes.
Yeah.
We have 22 for the motion and 20 for the amendment, so the motion's carried.
Okay, thank you, Ken. We'll move on to item 17, which is motion 9 by councillors Dawn and Kenny McLaren. Councillor Dawn.
Thanks, Provost. I think this motion is especially relevant given yesterday's UK budget announcements. Yesterday, the Chancellor had the chance to do the right thing and keep the £20 universal credit uplift in place for those who need it the most. But instead, he chose to extend it by 6 months, delaying the misery and uncertainty for so many people and families who have been relying on this and are going to be affected by this move. Nothing has changed since the start of the pandemic. Those on the lowest income brackets are suffering the most, and this uplift has acted as a lifeline for so many people and families. It's estimated that this will plunge 500,000 people into poverty, including 200,000 children. Do the Tories really think this is acceptable? Withdrawing this £20 in the autumn is only going to plunge more people into debt, more people into poverty, and more people into misery. After years of freezes, universal credit wasn't enough to live on before the pandemic, and it certainly won't be in the aftermath. People are now going to be worrying about how they're going to make ends meet when this comes to an end. And I don't think people who have never actually experienced poverty truly realise the difference that this money can make to someone's living standards. What's going to get cut out of their living budget? Is it going to be food? Is it going to be heating? Heating or eating? This is the harsh reality that people in Renfrewshire, our constituents, are going to be faced with after the summer when they lose this £20. I'd really like to see some of the ministers or the Chancellor getting by on universal credit for the next 6 months. I really can't imagine that they understand what it's like to scrimp to get by, to wish you could save for a rainy day, to genuinely only have a couple of pounds to your name that's to last you the rest of the week, or to need to actually go along and use a food bank. Now, don't get me wrong, the extension to this is very welcome, but it doesn't go anywhere near far enough to scratch the surface of the mess that this systematically driven austerity agenda that the Tory UK government have inflicted on welfare recipients in Renfrewshire over the last decade has caused. Does the Chancellor have a crystal ball? Does Rishi Sunak know that the situation is going to be better for universal credit recipients in the autumn? If our experiences recently have taught us anything, it's that we don't know what's around the corner, and this extension simply brings more uncertainty into the lives of the people that the UK government are supposed to be protecting. Many people have been incurring extra expenses as a result of the pandemic, whether that's through shielding, through job loss, or significant reductions in their hours, and people have had their children at home. People have been dragged into debt. Food bank use has never been higher, and these problems aren't all going to go away in September. And why this government has refused to extend this payment to those on legacy benefits is beyond me. Sick and disabled people have been hugely disadvantaged during this pandemic, and they deserve the same amount of support going forward. The Scottish Government are investing in our people and creating a fairer social security system with game-changing policies like the Scottish Child Payment, the Best Start Grant, and a pledge to provide free school meals for all primary school children. This is a social security system that's built on dignity and respect. But contrast this with the complete riot that we have down the road in Westminster with the DWP, and it really is an eye-opener. You've really got to ask yourself why. Why is clawing this £20 back from universal credit claimants so important to the Tories? Why do they want to reduce welfare claimants' universal credit payments? Why does the United Nations and every single poverty charity in the UK condemn the Tory government for its draconian welfare policies? It's because the Conservative Party do not care who goes hungry, who's homeless, or who's going through the hardest of times. Austerity and countless cuts have been a choice, and so is taking away this £20 payment. It's a choice to make people in Renfrewshire poorer. The UK government should do the right thing, make this uplift permanent and extend it to include legacy benefits. I really hope the Council will support this motion today and we can write to the Chancellor asking him to rethink this completely foolish decision. Please support the motion. Thanks.
Aye, Provost, you're on. Can I formally second and reserve the right to come back in?
Sorry, yeah, that's what I was asking when I was muted. Do we have any amendments to this motion? No, Councillor Devine, did you have an amendment?
No, Provost, that's why I never said it. I was just going to say we'll support this motion.
Okay, Councillor Bibby, you wanted to speak on this item?
Yes, Provost. Just echo the sentiment. Initial on in recognising that this is one of the most important, or arguably the most important motion that's come before this meeting today. We talk about the it's an homogenous experience for people that
I know I've got them.
Yeah, I was just going to say you don't say much because unless some.
Excuse me, someone's talking.
Yeah.
Can you all make sure you're muted, please?
Mrs. McLaren.
That Mags, we'll get her later.
That's
okay. Do you want to carry on then?
He wasn't saying anything insulting. I don't think anyway, Provost. Thank you.
No, carry on, Councillor Bibby.
Yeah, yeah. The pandemic has not been an homogeneous experience. We've had 4 pandemics, haven't we? We've had the one for people who are relatively affluent and have been able to stay at home and work from home. We've had the pandemic for frontline workers, and we've had the pandemic for employees who suffered insecure contracts, loss of wages, 0 hours, and also those entirely dependent upon benefits such as universal credit. And Councillor Dunn said things haven't changed since the pandemic. They've actually got worse in the sense that the cost of living for those people who are on universal credit has actually increased. Welcome the increase, but rightly, this should be made permanent. The poverty action groups and the CAB have indicated that there's been an 81% increase in claimants in the last year, and that without this top-up uplift, 6 out of 10 people who they come across basically could not make ends meet. So I think it's absolutely essential that this uplift is continued, and hopefully that the Tories will act out of altruism rather than self-interest. But there is a compelling economic argument for this as well, because if this money is increased permanently, it will be spent in local shops, in local businesses, and effectively will help to kickstart the economy. However, I don't think it's necessarily just a binary issue in terms of responsibility and blame here, because the Scottish Government, the SNP government, should also take steps to use the welfare powers that they already have to maximum effect, which they're not doing, and actually mitigate against this. But I do support motion and would commend it to the rest of the meeting. Thank you. Provost.
Thank you, Councillor Bibby. Councillor McCartan.
Yes, thank you, Provost. I mean, £20. What does £20 mean to some people? For some, it's a few pounds for 3 or 4 lattes in the week that they might want. For some, it's a huge increase in the amount of money they need to do things like feed their children. That's what the difference is in £20. I think the people making the decisions must be very much in the first classification that I've given you there. Most of those people can never have known real poverty. Making this payment permanent would be a contribution to supporting the poorest in our society. And if at the end of the day, those of us who have a little bit more have to pay a wee bit more tax to pay for it, then so be it. I think it's a very good motion and I think we should support it.
Thank you, Councillor McCartan. Well, there are no amendments and I don't think anyone else wishes to come in and speak, so we'll... Oh, sorry, Kenny. When you go.
It's okay, Mags isn't here anymore. I do welcome the news that the Chancellor agreed to extend the uplift for 6 months, but that simply isn't enough. It also doesn't help those on legacy benefits such as income support, job seekers allowance or employment support allowance. Of course, I'm surprised they've not come in, but the usual nonsense from the Tories would be the country can't afford to increase the benefits. But that hasn't stopped them raiding the public purse to line the pockets of their friends and their donors. The money is there. It's just the Tories would rather ignore the most vulnerable in society and give public funding to their pals. And this money is needed by people now more than ever. The additional payment was a recognition of the additional financial pressures COVID has brought to those on benefits. The COVID pandemic has highlighted Tory incompetence and greed, filling the pockets of their donors and friends. All the while, around 125,000 people have died of COVID. 125,000 lives who don't matter to Boris the Butcher. These deaths, or at least the vast majority of them, lie at his door due to his dithering, his delays, and his total and absolute incompetence. While everyone else is looking at how to save lives, Johnson and his crooked cronies were looking at how to line their own or their friends' pockets. I don't know if people saw it in the news just a few weeks ago. NASA sent a rocket to Mars. It cost them about $2.5 billion, roughly £2 billion. Compare that to the £22 billion the Tories have wasted on a track and test system that doesn't even work. For that amount of money, we could have sent Boris and around 10 of his cabinet on a one-way trip to Mars. That would have been a better use of that money. There is no reason why the Tory government couldn't extend this payment to other benefits and make it permanent, other than their obsession with punishing the poorest in our society. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McLaren. Natalie, there's no opposition to this motion, but do you want to sum up before we move on to the next item?
Yeah, I mean, I won't mention much. I think I said most of it in my initial speech, but just in terms of the comments that the Scottish Government should be mitigating this, I think that the Scottish Government mitigate enough and clean up enough of the Tory and the UK Government's mess already. We are putting money, the Scottish Government are putting money back into families' pockets with things like the Scottish Child Payment that I referred to. In 6 months' time, the Tories are taking that right back out again. So this problem doesn't lie with the Scottish Government. It's a UK Government policy. But I'm pleased that councillors are supporting the motion today. So thanks.
Okay. The motion is agreed. And we'll move on to item 18 in the agenda, which is motion 10 by councillors Grady and Kennedy. Councillor Grady.
Thank you, Provost. Curriculum for Excellence was launched in Scottish schools in 2010 and gives teachers more flexibility over what and how they teach. In 2015, the First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, infamously stated that the country must hold her to account on her record on education. Following a highly critical report from a Scottish Parliament committee, which said there had been a clear lack of leadership from education officials and that there were concerns about the narrowing of subject choice, particularly for those young people in more disadvantaged areas, the Scottish Government commissioned the Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD, to undertake a review. The report was initially intended to examine only the senior phase of Scottish education, S4 to S6. However, the Education Secretary and the Deputy First Minister, John Swinney, were later forced by a vote in the Scottish Parliament to widen the review to include the whole of Curriculum for Excellence, effectively a review of the entire school system, arguably a report card for Miss Sturgeon's record on education. Concerningly, Mr Swinney recently announced that publication of the review would be delayed until June 2021, though it had originally been expected to be released in February ahead of the Holyrood elections in May. The Scottish Government has blamed the delay on the COVID-19 pandemic. However, it appears that the OECD have indeed been able to gather evidence for the report virtually over the last few months. They have consulted with a wide range of educational stakeholders, as well as undertaking virtual school visits, and it has now emerged that the OECD has actually completed a draft of the review, which is currently in the hands of the Scottish Government. The matter was debated last week in Holyrood, with MSPs calling for the immediate publication of the draft report. Of course, I anticipate that the response from SNP councillors here today will be to claim that the report is not complete and is still under review. The reality of this is that the draft report will undoubtedly be bouncing back and forth between the various opaque and impregnable educational quangos such as Education Scotland and the SQA, which do the Scottish Government's bidding, attempting to remove any unpalatable findings which this report will almost certainly obtain and contain. Both Education Scotland and the SQA have lost the confidence of those they are tasked to serve and have repeatedly shown they are not fit for purpose. Their invisibility and ineptitude throughout the current pandemic crisis have brought into sharp focus for all those working in Scottish classrooms every day. However, make no mistake about who ultimately sets the agenda for these bodies. It is the Scottish Government. Councillors, the uncomfortable truth is our education system in Scotland has gone from the envy of the world to something which the Scottish Government would rather brush under the carpet. The education system has arguably faced its greatest ever challenges over the past 12 months, and the staff, learners and parents have responded incredibly. Our schools might have closed to most, but through their efforts, learning still takes place. The whole purpose of the OECD review was so that we can learn from the many mistakes which have been made in the implementation of the Curriculum for Excellence. Now, as we move into the time of year where young people in the senior phase of school are normally guided by their teachers toward appropriate course choices, we need to help the professions do this in a well-informed way. We and they need to know the outcomes of this report on the Scottish curriculum to help us make the right decisions for our schools who have been through so much recently. The sooner the report is made public in the public domain, the better. I am sure you will agree that it is important for us to consider the different mechanisms which are in place for us, and indeed the electorate, to hold the Scottish Government to account in reliable and transparent ways. Withholding this report does not feel that we are being afforded the opportunity to properly scrutinise the current administration's record on education. Instead, it feels very much like the Scottish Government is yet again marking their own jotters. Make no mistake, if this report was a thumping affirmation of Curriculum for Excellence, Mr Swinney et al. Would be shouting it from the rooftops. The fact it remains as yet unpublished speaks volumes. Councillors, I know, like me, you care deeply about the educational experiences and outcomes of Renfrewshire's children and young people. Therefore, I ask that you join with me today in urging the Scottish Government to release the OECD's unedited interim report of their review of the Curriculum for Excellence immediately. This crucial information must be made into the public domain prior to this year's Holyrood elections so that the Scottish people can indeed hold Nicola Sturgeon to account on her record on education. Thank you, Provost.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Kennedy, are you going to second?
Formally second and reserve the right to speak.
Okay, do we have any amendments to the motion? No amendments. Councillor Bibby.
Thank you, Provost. The motion calls for the release of this report before the election to put it in the public domain. So the questions are, yes, it should be published. Is it potentially damaging to the SNP government? Probably. And do the public need to have it in order to fully understand the failures of the SNP? Well, that's a point of debate, but let's look at the charge sheet, which is compelling already, and also recognise that the SNP government have form on this because they abandoned the publication of international comparisons, which gave an unfavourable impression of Scottish education, and also the domestic surveys. So there is form there when there is bad news to be hidden. Councillor Grady referred to the issue of subject choice and the narrowing of curriculum choices. We've fallen behind in terms of the PISA figures in maths and science, desperately so. Reading is at the same level as it was 10 years ago, although it's improved slightly in the last couple of years. Alongside of that, we've missed class size targets, insufficient support to children with special needs, and the flagship education bill, which was designed in actual fact to make radical changes, abandoned. And the attainment gap is the critical one on which, as Councillor Grady said, Nicola Sturgeon should be judged. I'm sure she wanted to be judged rather than condemned. Goodness only knows what the COVID pandemic has done to the attainment gap, because we know of the issues of children from deprived communities across Scotland and their educational experience as outlined by parents or some parents over the last year. And as recently as September of this year, the Scottish Household Survey reported that 20% the poorest areas in Scotland, 20% of those people in the poorest areas in Scotland have no qualifications at all and have not reached any positive destinations. That's that esoteric term. And yet the 20% in the richest areas, there are 50% or more people with degrees and professional qualifications. I think that clearly the education system in Scotland is in need of radical change, and crisis would not be a word that would be inappropriate. Lindsay Patterson, professor at Edinburgh University, said that Scotland's education system is stagnating in mediocrity. I think the public are aware of that, and the Curriculum of Excellence report by the OCED would, I think, confirm much of what in actual fact we know already. So yes, the report should be published, but prior to the election in May, the public are clear about the education failings of the SNP government. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Bibby. We have no amendments and we have no other, no more people wish to contribute to the debate, or do we? Sorry, I'm going to bring you in, Councillor Kennedy, just a wee second. Before I bring Eddie Grady in to sum up, do you want to?
Lorraine, my hand's been up for ages and ages.
I am sorry, Eileen.
You've obviously got a blind spot where I'm concerned.
Are you kidding?
Yeah. Is it okay if I come in?
You get more grace than anybody else. Right, okay, Eileen. I apologise, Eileen. Please accept my apologies.
That's okay. I think you have a hard job to do, trying to keep us all in check and all the technology. So I'll forgive you, madam.
The officers have just noticed that your hand was up too. They've just notified me there. So clearly you were. It was not seen.
But it has been up for a wee while. So right. I mean, just to say, if we think about what Nicola Sturgeon said, judge me on my record on education. Well, if she can give us the report, it will allow us to judge her on her education, on her record in education. What are she and John Swinney so afraid of? I know my colleagues in Holyrood have demanded this report, but they are not getting their hands on it. No, it will be assessed by the SNP, and while they may not be able to edit it all to their liking, they'll keep it as a work in progress, as has been said, until after the election, to try to assure their supporters that they don't have yet another big gaffe in their parliamentary activities, as if the Nicola Alex fiasco were not enough. Councillor Grady referred to Education Scotland and the SQA, who will be allowed oversight and input into this report. This is the same Education Scotland and SQA which the Lib Dem MSPs last week got the Scottish Parliament to agree were no longer fit for purpose. It is, if the government cannot be open with the reports, we are left with the only conclusion that they must have something to hide. So please let us see the reports. Thank you. And thank you for your forbearance.
Thank you, Councillor McCartan. Councillor Rodden.
Thanks, Provost. I didn't intend to come in on this, but after some of the comments that I've heard, I feel like I have to. There's been a picture painted that this is some big cover-up, which is smacks of another few comments that have been made about different circumstances recently by some politicians from opposition parties. I'm on the Education Scotland website at the moment, reading a post from the 8th of September last year, about 10 days after the very first meeting of the OECD to discuss this paper, this report. And the timeline was clearly laid out at that point in September last year that the report would be released in June 2021. It's not a big cover-up. They're not hiding it because there's all these negative things that they don't want anybody to see. This is the timeline that was always given. I don't understand what the issue is here.
Thanks, Councillor Rodden. Councillor Kennedy, do you want to come and second the motion before we let Eddie sum up?
Yeah, I've already seconded it. And just to say, I think it's the first time I've ever agreed with everything Eileen McCartan said. I'm more than happy to let Eddie sum up. That's
a good first, Eileen. Okay, Councillor Grady, do you want to sum up?
Thank you, Provost. Look, the Scottish Parliament demanded this report 2 weeks ago, and SNP are still refusing to release it. They have it. They need to release it. We need to know the outcomes of this report on the Scottish curriculum to help us make the right decisions for our schools. The sooner this report is in the public domain, the better it is for everybody. Thank you, Provost.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Grady. There were no amendments to your motion, so your motion is carried. And we move on to item 19 in the agenda, which is motion 11 by Councillors McCartan and Andy Doig. Eileen, are you?
Can I say I'm going to withdraw this motion? I don't think it's relevant at this time.
Okay, Eileen, that's motion 11 is withdrawn. And we move on to item 20 in the agenda, the final item in the agenda. It's motion 12 by Councillors Dawn and McNaughton. Councillor Dawn.
Thanks, Provost. Yeah, I'm taking a slightly different tone for this one. I'm happy to bring this to the Council today. As we all know, Renfrewshire Council have declared a climate emergency, and we're taking steps to combat that, and some of which we've kind of briefly touched on today. Affirming our commitment to biodiversity and making efforts to halt biodiversity loss goes hand in hand with the climate response. The declaration is being supported by many Scottish councils already, and we will have a central role to play in this as well. Biodiversity and climate change are closely linked, and there are many ways that we as people benefit from biodiversity, whether that's through our natural resources, food production, medicine, or even jobs. The pandemic, I think, has been a further reminder for many of us of the importance of nature and our surroundings. And that's for both, I think, our physical and our mental well-being. And we need to ensure that our natural environment going forward is both protected and enhanced for our own sake and for our future generations. If we're serious about tackling climate change, I think ending biodiversity loss and providing new, greener opportunities for employment and production, this agreement is going to be vital going forward. And I hope all councillors will agree to this today. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Dunn. Councillor McNaughton?
Yes, formally second and reserve the right to speak later.
Okay, do we have any amendments to the motion? No, but I think Councillor Devine wants to say something.
You're on mute, Councillor Devine.
Councillor Devine, you're on. Yeah.
I'm sure you're fed up hearing me saying this. We agree with this. Well done, Natalie. No, not.
Good to hear.
Okay, then we have no amendments. Natalie, no one else wishes to join the debate, so your motion is carried. And that is the meeting finished. So thanks all very much for your patience, great patience you've shown today. I really appreciate it. It's not been an easy day for anyone, so thank you, and we will see you hopefully.
Provost, could I just ask if it's still sunny down in Renfrew?
Well, if it is, I'm driving there just in about 5 minutes.
Well done, Provost.
Eddie, I'm sure you'll agree with me that the sun wasn't shining in Glenburn today.
It certainly wasn't. No,
it's God's country too.
I know, but we can't. We'll keep that to ourselves. Our folk will want to move here.
Sun shines in Glenburn.
Okay, thanks, and thanks to all of the staff too that were assisting in the facilitation of today's meeting. Thanks so much.
Following on from Karen Kennedy's comment, should we put motion 8